The United States House has passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, delivering $1.5 trillion in tax cuts over a decade, slashing corporate and individual rates to boost key economic growth. Now, key changes include a 3.5% tax on remittances by non-citizens that's starting January 2026, a 10% tariff on select imports, and U.S. credits for US-based manufacturing. In fact, tax credit, I beg your pardon, for US-based manufacturing. The bill aims to fund border security while sparking a debate over its impact on immigrants and global trade. Supporters say that 3.5% of remittance tax promotes economic nationalism, while critics warn that it burdens immigrant communities and could disrupt global trade. We ask, how will the 3.5% remittance tax for non-citizens effective January 2026 impact immigrant communities and the economies of these countries that are heavily reliant on US remittances like Mexico and India? What are the potential economic trade-offs of the $1.5 trillion tax cuts and 10% tariffs on select imports? We ask all of those questions with our guest who's joining us now, Rajkamal Rao, Managing Director of Rao Advisors LLC and OPED columnist. Thank you very much, Mr. Rao, for joining us here on ET. Now, I want to first ask you about this big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump has been talking about since past many months. How do you anticipate this to significantly boost economic growth as Trump claims, or is this completely turning fiscal prudence on its head?
Thank you for having me. This is a very different bill from the bills that we have seen in the past. You're right that it is that Trump calls it the big, beautiful bill. Everybody has to call it now because it's part of the congressional language. But if you look at what they're doing, they're essentially, it is a workers' rights bill. And what he's doing is following through on his campaign promises when he said that he will not tax any tip income or he will not tax any overtime income. And these are very popular with the MAGA base because a lot of working class, middle class people today, they have to pay very high amounts of taxation on those income income types. And there is also this thing about the senior citizens. He has also promised not to tax their social security benefits. So there are some good things in the bill. And as you said correctly, he has money set aside for building his famous wall that finally passed the House. And he has additional terms for border enforcement. So there are a few of his priorities have been addressed. As you said, the most important question now is what is going to happen next, which is this still has to pass the Senate. And this is a big bill. It adds about $2.5 trillion to the deficit. It locks in on the 2017 tax cuts that Trump passed. So there is a lot of moving parts to this, but the next big hurdle is the United States Senate.
So, of course, it'll have to pass a Senate test. But with respect to closing in on the fiscal deficit, is Donald Trump placing too much trust in benefits that he thinks that he could possibly get on account of deals with countries? Or is there an actual plan that Trump has to add to the coffers? Because when he talks about, the tax that he's going to impose on workers who are, working in the United States, the remittance tax, the tariff, advantages that he believes. But is he placing over-optimism on all of those with respect to the revenues that the United States might get on account of these policies?
Yeah, so if you recall, we talked about the remittance tax, I think it was last week. I don't think the remittance tax is going to make a huge dent in the overall scheme of things. So, but you're right, the tariffs can be a big part. He really believes that tariffs are a source of revenue, and that revenue will directly go to the Treasury, and therefore he can kind of balance out his priorities by relying on tariffs as a way to bring in additional revenues. As you know, he just announced a 50% across the board tariff on all European Union imports starting June 1st. He also announced a 25% tariff on Apple products that are not made in the US. So he really believes that tariffs are going to change the game. They're going to change the revenue equation for the US Treasury. And in regards to the debt, I think Scott Bessent was on, I don't know, he was on some TV program this morning where he said that essentially the growth of the economy has to be faster than the way the debt is rising. That's the only way America can afford this big bill. So that is, you're right, that is the key question. Will all of these policies actually change the GDP growth versus debt curve?
Absolutely, and that is going to be a key thing to watch out for, given the concerns that have been raised by all three ratings agencies, whether it's Moody's, whether it's S&P or Fitch. They raised those concerns regarding ballooning debt in the United States, and of course, its impact on the overall economy and consumers. But sir, I want to ask you: will this move over a period of time lead to imprisonment of the dollar and a further push towards de-dollarization, against which Donald Trump has been actively vocal against that move towards de-dollarization by BRICS nations specifically? But do you think that this is going to give a push to that further?
At some point, this is, by the way, already happening. If you look at the de-dollarization, for example, if you look at trade volumes between Russia and China, today most of the trade is happening either in rubles or the yuan. And this has been happening between Russia and Turkey is actually a NATO member. So the de-dollarization, as you very well say, that was, after all, the BRICS vision. And the BRICS countries have been a little slow in embracing that concept. I have written about this in the past, that for the world economies to grow, we need another international currency of repute to challenge the dollar and the euro for cross-border trade, and that is really going to bring down the dependence on any one currency. And the tariffs, I think, are going to be the trigger, and you may not see a formal new currency launched. That will still take some time, but already these bilateral trades that are happening today are already in vogue, and you know this well. Today, if you go to Dubai or if you go to Thailand, Indians can pay with their rupees. They no longer have to seek the foreign exchange of that particular country. So I think a lot of the de-dollarization will happen between countries in a bilateral manner, and that will dent the impact of the dollar.
Right. So this, you say, is going to give a further push to de-dollarization. But sir, one final question before we let you go, and this essentially is on the impact on markets near term and longer term, and how should Indian investors be looking at markets then, given the fact that over the past few days, it is global cues that have impacted Indian markets. Has been some volatility on account of those factors. And secondly, related to that question is, will FII's appetite then for India increase? What do you have to say on those 2 points?
So that's a very good question. It is still to be seen. Today, the futures were down as soon as he announced the tariffs against the EU. The futures went down. The automotive stocks in Europe, they all took a hit. So I think for the next several months, there will be a lot of, shall we say, uncertainty. Markets hate uncertainty. And so the trade policies, you never know. There is some talk that India and the US are closing in on a trade deal. That, I think, will be a big boost to the Indian stock markets. Just imagine the glee that there will be if you actually sign a deal, if Indians sign a deal with the US. So a lot of it I think is going to depend on what's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 months. But regarding the FII, you're absolutely right. Again, it goes back to your earlier question about the dollar. So if the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, which we hope, which everybody hopes they don't, Trump wants the Federal Reserve Bank to lower interest rates. But if they raise interest rates because they see a risk of economic, inflation and other economic issues, then there will be a flight to the dollar. And a flight to the dollar means that investors will flee India and go to the dollar, and that is not going to be good for the Indian stock market. But a lot of things are up in play, and everything will depend on the tariffs in the coming months.
Right. A lot really is dependent on the tariff policy of the United States administration, how it's going to play out. In fact, how the US-India trade deal is going to shape up. That will have a larger impact as well, Mr. Rao, on Indian equities and, of course, overall on investor sentiment. Thank you very much with your thoughts on that very crucial story that we're tracking here on ET Now.
Thank you for having me.
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap on this edition of India Tonight. Goodbye and thank you very much for staying with us.